important pursuit in life is to be single. Totally single. Say that with me. Say it again loud, together. The most important thing in life is to be totally single. Say it again. The most important thing in life is to be totally single. I know you don't believe that yet. So I'm going to prove that before we leave here. Number 2, singleness is the foundation of all relationships. Say that with me. Singleness is the foundation of all relationships. And that includes you and your boss, student and teacher, parents and children, citizens and politicians, friends, colleagues, and of course, in relationships that are more intimate, like marriage. Your singleness is the foundation of all of those relationships. How you get along on your job is totally determined by your singleness. Number 3, singleness determines the quality of relationships personally, socially, and professionally. I want you to take this to heart, please. If you're having problems on your job, getting along with people, that's a singleness problem. If you always seem to have tension with people in your office or on the job as a plumber, or always having fights and stress relationships in your department or in the police force or in the hotel, wherever you work, that's a sign that you are suffering from a singleness problem. If you're having problems personally with your spouse, that's a sign that you and your spouse are both perhaps struggling with a singleness problem. I want to prove that tonight from some facts based on scripture. Let me first of all begin with this concept. The most important relationship in life is not interpersonal relationship. Most of us probably focus too much on getting along with other people. Matter of fact, this is why I got single bars and single dance and single boat rides and single, everyone trying to go to these places so they can get along with someone else or find someone else. And I want to suggest to you that that is not your priority. Your most important relationship is not interpersonal relationship, but it is intra-personal relationship. Your first and most important relationship you should develop is not with other people, but with yourself. That is called intrapersonal relationships. And why is this so important? Because the most important person you should desire to know is not other people, but yourself. And the average person in this planet know very little about the truth about themselves. They keep putting on other people's images. We live other people's expectations. We allow society to create us, and instead of having a self-concept, we have an other concept. That means we have a picture that people want us to look like. And this third point is important. Self-knowledge is the key to all relationships. Even knowledge of your strengths may be important to you, but also your weaknesses are important. You have to know where you are weak. Because if you don't know where you are weak in your own self, that will become a hindrance to all relationships you have. You need to know what you have to manage. I think a lot of us know some things about ourselves that we deny. And we sometimes want to say that someone made us do certain things, when in fact we decided to do it because of our tendencies, and we need to manage those things. We must be careful that we don't blame other people for ourselves. And point number 4, the most important person for you to love is not other people, but it's you. If I was to say my most important point tonight, this is it right here. the most important person for you to love is you. Say that with me. The most important person for me to love is myself. Say it again. The most important person for me to love is who? Myself. I want to prove that also tonight, because that is part of your conditions of stress. We always talk about loving our neighbor, and we even misquote the scriptures in this regard. But let me just give you something. Let's look at a scripture for a minute where we get this idea from. Jesus was asked a question by someone, and it's a very important question, and to understand the question you got to understand who was talking. The person who asked the question was a Pharisee. A Pharisee was a religious leader of that day. Pharisees were trained in all the laws of Moses and the prophets. There were 669 laws, write that down, you're going to remember that the Pharisees tried to obey. In other words, they studied the whole Old Testament, especially the first 5 books called the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, and they extracted every single law, or anything that looks like a law, they extracted it because they wanted to obey them so they could be righteous before God. So there were 669 laws when they counted them up. Now that's a lot of laws to try and remember. I won't talk about trying to keep. No wonder why they were always frustrated, because they were far, you see. That's why they called others sad, you see. They were sad, you see. They were trying to do this stuff that was so tough. And it's very interesting. One of them came to Jesus and asked a very important question, and I think it's the kind of question you and I would want to ask too. In other words, look, I grew up in my father's Jewish house. I've been to the synagogue. I took theology. I'm a Pharisee. I've been trying to get this thing to work for the last, 50 years of my life. Look, Jesus, you seem to be very smart. Okay, can you tell me, out of all the 69 laws, here was a question, which one is the greatest to keep? In other words, if I was going to keep one law more than all the others, what's the most important law for a human to keep before God? That was a good question. Because 669 is just too many to remember. And I won't even talk about trying to keep. So can you boil it down for me, Jesus? Just break it down. Just give me the main one. And his answer blew their minds. He didn't say, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't curse, don't worship other gods. He didn't say that. He just said the most important law is this: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all of your mind. And then he did something the man didn't ask. The man asked him for one answer, and that's important. But he gave him 2 answers to one question. Why? Because he couldn't answer the question with one answer, because the question required 2 answers. Now notice what the answers were. He said, first of all, you should love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. But then he kicks in. He says, oh, and the second one is just like the first. Now the man didn't ask you for the second one. There's only one question. But you see, Jesus said, look, the second one is connected to the first. Love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. See, a lot of us find it easy to say we love God. We worship, we give, I love you, Lord, and I praise you, Lord, and you're faithful to church, and you're always going out to these meetings and prayer meetings, and you go witnessing, and God said, okay, that's fine, but what about the second part? I know you love me. But he said,
in Genesis 18, did God say, "It is not good for man to be single double quotes question mark.no, he said, "It is not good that the man should be alone." God had no problem with the man's separateness, his uniqueness, or his wholeness. As a matter of fact, Adam did not know that he was alone. God's statement was predicated on his own observation of the situation, on his own wisdom. The implication is that Adam was so totally unique and so whole that he did not miss anybody. He was so together so separate, and so complete in himself that he did not even know he needed anyone else. Having a companion was not Adam's idea, but God's. Another thing that you need to see is that Adam did not need a wife. That is another misconception we have gotten from traditional thinking. God did not say, Adam is not a whole being, so I will make him a wife to complete him. In essence, God said, I am going to make him a helper who will be compatible, or suitable, or like him, another being who will complement him and be complemented by him.
The second one is just like the first one, which means they are equal. This is deep. He said, and the second one is like the first one, and here it is. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he says, all the 669 laws are in this one law. If you keep this one law, you don't need the 669. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. Now, I want you to read that verse very carefully. He did not say love your neighbor first. And that's where we keep making a mistake. We keep trying to love people without the prerequisite. Let me break it down for you. I did a research on this verse when I was in school in university. It's one of the verses that I researched with my professor, who's going to be here next week, Dr. Jerry Horner. He was the leading, and still is one of the leading Greek scholars in the entire United States. He helped to translate the NIV Bible. He also translated the New Spirit Bible. This guy is good. He'll be with us next week. Make sure don't miss him being here. You will go advanced like that when you read the Bible. The guy is good. But in his class at university, I remember him, we went through this whole chapter, and it shocked me when he gave us the meaning of the root word that Jesus used. First it says love God, which means to pursue and focus on God's character and God's nature and God's qualities. When you love someone, you want to pursue them. You want to understand them. You want to get to know them. You want to be with them. Why? You want to understand how they think, what they need, what they want, what their desires are. He said, do that for God. Pursue God with all your might. Get to know God's qualities, his characteristics, his nature, what he's like. Stay with God so you can know God. But then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And here's the words that are used here in the original Greek. It means to the same degree. Love your neighbor to the same degree that you love yourself. In other words, the same measure that you love yourself is how you will love your neighbor, Jesus says. The implication is loving God should result in self-love, and then self-love qualifies you to love other love. Put it another way, you can only love others to the same degree and measure you love yourself. Write that down, very important. Stop trying to love people first. This is why you got hurt. If you don't love yourself, you need people to love you. And when they disappoint you, the whole bottom falls out, because now you don't feel loved again. If I love me and you don't love me, I am still loved. So if you keep your love from me, I still satisfied, because I loved you before you met me and I met you. So if you leave me, I still love me. So Christ is saying, look, the key is fall in love with yourself first. But that's not enough. He says, and the same measure you love yourself is the only measure you can love other people. So write this down. This is one of my favorite statements from I was 16 years old. And it goes like this. It is more important to love you than to love me. In other words, when anyone asks you or tells you they love you, your response should not be, I love you too. Wrong response. According to the kingdom of God that Jesus is establishing, he said, when they tell you, I love you, your response should be, but do you love you? Why? Because if you don't love you, you cannot love me, so you lying. In other words, it's more important for you to love you than to love me. I got to make sure you love you before you try to love me, because you can't love me more than you love you, so you better love you plenty. Am I getting through? See, this is why we are difficult to other people. We're trying to get them to love us so we can feel loved. That's why we're so manipulated by people. it's a sign of self-hatred. People say, I'll do anything for you. No, hold it, hold it. Don't you ever do that. And that's why it didn't work out for some of you. Because you went in looking for love.
The marriage came a few verses down. We put the marriage in verse 18 when it is not there. Verse 18 simply tells us of God creating a second human being. In verse 22, Moses wrote that God made the woman from Adam's rib. Some say the Hebrew word really means a cell, and presented her to the man. What we need to understand is that God made a second human being, not just for Adam to marry, but in order that he would not be alone. Therefore, you do not have to marry in order not to be alone. All you need not to be alone is to have some other humans to be your companions and close friends.
A lot of people are not married and yet are not alone, so we need to stop pressuring unmarried people to move into something that could prevent them from achieving the goal of total singleness. Marriage was not instituted, as you can see from God's attitude. In Genesis 2, to solve the problem of being alone, human beings were created as an answer to that problem.
And whenever you go in looking for love, they can control you 100%. Because they can threaten to take it back anytime. Loneliness is a manifestation of self-hatred. Let me put it another way, please. Write this down. 7 ways to self-love. Please, this is good stuff. Write this down. This is fresh from manna of heaven. Number 1, self-love is a result of self-discovery. I need another seminar to teach that all by itself. You got to discover yourself first, or you'll never love yourself. Number 2, self-love is a result of self-source. What I mean by that is you have to discover where yourself was sourced. Where did you come from? You cannot love yourself if you don't know where you came from. Because source determines value. Oh boy. In other words, if I took a piece of rock and I cut it in half, does it become anything else? No, it's just a piece of a rock again. And if I cut it again, what it becomes? A piece of rock again. In other words, whatever it was originally, no matter how I break it down, that's what it is. So if I took a diamond and I cut it in half, what I get? 2 diamonds. Cut it again, I got what? 4 diamonds. So now, you see, it maintains the value. So if you don't know your source, you don't know your value. Number 3, self-love is a result of self-worth. You can never give yourself worth if you don't know where you came from, and you can't know where you came from if you don't discover yourself and discover your source. In other words, you are suffering from other people's value of you, and that's why you need them to keep giving you value, or sometimes we create value out of the things we collect. That's why the fashion industry controls your life and you're broke and depressed, because you keep trying to buy things to give yourself value because you ain't know how much you're worth. This is why you collect cars with big names and dresses with fancy, brand names and shoes with brand names, and you want to live in a certain area. Why? Because that whole thing has to do with that lack of self-love. You need to collect things to give yourself value. That's why when you lose them, you really go crazy. Self-worth. Number 4, self-love is a result of self-esteem. Esteem means how much do you estimate you cost or worth? What is your estimate of your value? And some people, it is so low, they sell themselves on the street. It's called prostitution. Sometimes they sell themselves sophisticatedly in their jobs. Or even sell themselves in a relationship that they know they shouldn't go that low, but they don't have any estimation of their true value, and so they sell themselves cheap on the altar of compromise just to have company around them. What a tragedy. You shouldn't marry anybody to make you feel important. Forget it. Self-love is a result of self-esteem. When you realize how much you are worth, you fall in love with yourself. Let me give you an example. If I gave you a plastic ring out of a Cracker Jack box, and and then gave you a $10,000 diamond ring and gave you both of them, which one would you really love the most? Isn't that amazing? Which one would you want to know where it is all the time? You don't care where the plastic ring is. Which one do you put in a nice leather pouch, and you put it in a private place, maybe in a safe deposit? Yeah. I mean the plastic. See, self-estimation makes you treat yourself with leather pouch experience.
You will notice in Genesis the true pattern of God is that God presented the woman to the man. You may pray for a husband or wife, but then wait for God to present him or her. It is essential to note that God only presented her to the man. He did not choose her for the man. He preserved man's power to choose by simply presenting her. Adam made the decision. He chose her. In essence, God will not choose your mate for you, for if he did, that would violate your will and power of choice.
As a matter of fact, if God chose your mate for you, he would not only be violating your right to choose, but he would be taking responsibility for your relationship. If it failed, the blame could be transferred to God. This point is crucial, for I have counseled many individuals who were misguided by the misconception that God has created only one specific person on this planet for them to marry.